Keith Jones.
Rick Strong.
How are you, buddy?
Good. As our friend Pete says, Rick Strong, as I live and breathe. Send a shout out to Pete, Sun and
Hey,
Shine.
Pete, how you doing, man?
Good.
And Jamie, too. Man.
Yes, Jamie, Sun and Shine. Dynamo couple.
It's so true, and what great kids, too.
Oh, yeah, they are, man. You had some time with them up in Sedona.
I did, yeah. They came up. They were kind enough to take time out of their summer and spent a day with me and an evening, and we had a really great time together. The little one, Charlotte, discovered the garden. And,
Yes.
she really enjoyed that. She went crazy over my pea pots, you know.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, they came back and told me that they had just a great time. And Pete is a good friend of ours, and he went on a ski trip with us recently.
Yeah.
And I told Pete how great Rick was, and Pete was eager to have his family meet Rick after he spent some time with Rick in Colorado, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, all of this is made possible by Keith Jones. There's no doubt, since I've been a member of ToBeRe going back 12 years, the guy is just a master at understanding, helping people, and having no judgment about anyone. And he attracts those kinds of people, and it's a joy to be with you and to be with the people that are your friends.
That's high praise. Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it, man. I humbly accept it. Thank you.
That's true.
So we're going to talk about the importance of routine today.
Okay.
You thought that would be a great topic,
Yeah.
and I certainly agree.
Okay.
And I am a creature of routine, and that's changed for me over the years. I was a creature of routine because it was achievement oriented before. What can I get out of it? So I need to do this and this and this so I can be on task to accomplish this and realize this goal. It was very much self-serving. And as a recovering perfectionist, I had no peace when I was approaching routine from that perspective.
So what changed about it, and what is your routine now? And does it still involve sort of accomplishment, or is there another goal?
Well, the routine now is free of this kind of perfection seeking. So it's free of that, and it involves more of a mindfulness and consciousness practice now. So that's what I'm trying to cultivate. And the routine is pretty simple. I start out with the gratitude, which I've shared in a podcast before called Gratitude.
No, we're talking about something you do every morning, or
Every morning,
Okay.
without fail. I never miss this routine. So it involves stretching. It involves a few exercises like push-ups and squats and things like that. But it also involves the gratitude. It involves reading something that is good for me to be mindful of, being kind, being considerate, thoughtful, compassionate, accepting life as it shows up, even if it's not to my liking, saying yes to that. And it reminds me to see the good in others and that I'm here to serve. So my practice is really geared toward rooting me into that kind of truth. And I do it every single day.
My gosh. Now, that's something that's fairly new. I remember in the old days, you were very, very disciplined, but there was no component about gratitude, or there was no component about, not that you weren't grateful in your life, but there was no intention put on gratitude, nor was there something about reading self-help or reading something that was uplifting. How did that change, and how is it different now? What do you realize about yourself that you didn't have before?
Well, it changed 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, and I've talked about this story too. Something happened 4 years ago in another podcast we did called Useless Emotions, in which the suffering in my life became too great. I was still accomplishing things, I was still reaching goals, but there was this lack of peace in my life. I was obsessively thinking about what I had to do next. I was reliving the past if someone hurt me or something didn't go well. And I was anxious about what would happen in the future. There was absolutely no peace. I was making other people wrong. Sometimes I was a victim. Other times I was a hero in a certain narrative. It was just nonstop, man. I just couldn't shut down the thinking, but at the root of it was nothing but suffering. And while I was helping other people, I was not peaceful inside as consistently as I wanted to be. And so that needed to change. And so, there are two ways that we come about change. Voluntary, which is rare. Most of it is involuntary. The doctor tells us if we don't clean up our act, we're going to be we're going to be rushing to an early grave, or we go through a relationship transition in which we are either divorced or we lose someone close to us, which I was on the end of a relationship, and it also affected my business. So I knew that there was a path forward, and the path that I was going to choose is going to be free of suffering. And so I needed a routine to root me into being kind, loving, compassionate, forward. And so that's why I chose to do something different.
So kind, loving, compassionate, that's kind of what your focus is then on your morning routine.
Absolutely.
And so
and gratitude.
And gratitude. And does that practice then allow you to sort of catch your breath later during the day? I mean, I picture you doing this in the morning, and then what happens when the obstacles hit, as they always do, during the day? How do you recapture what you felt so good about, say, at 6 in the morning?
Well, you know what? My day is actually perfect the rest of the day. Nothing bad happens.
Yeah, that's right.
Nothing goes wrong.
Well, sign me up for that. I'll take a tablespoon or two of that
No,
stuff.
man, you're right, man. As soon as I step out of the house, there's the cop on his motorbike, radar gun out like right off the bat. So as soon as I walk out, there's booby traps along the way. But really, I don't see them as booby traps. I just see them as opportunities to bring me back to the present moment. And so I see the good in them. I see that they serve the purpose that I like to see, that they serve as an opportunity to practice being conscious. So throughout the course of the day, when people show up from whatever space they're showing up from, whether they're conscious or there's a lack of consciousness in that moment, I bring the practice back in. So I feel, oh my God, that felt like an attack. Or they said this, I'm like, oh, no, that person just behaved a certain way, and this is an opportunity to practice accepting how they showed up. Oh, the narrative will be like, man, I should be offended. I could be offended. I'm choosing not to be. And so the practice happens there. And, early on, I didn't catch it that quickly at all. What would happen is I would feel hurt, feel wronged, feel upset, and sometimes not even examine why. But I just felt like I didn't feel good. I felt like I was suffering. And that went on for a long time, but the more and more I did my daily routine, it just kind of permeated my entire day. And I started to catch those other moments, and it wasn't 2 or 3 days later that I was like, why was I mad and upset like 3 days ago? Oh, that happened. But I was able to reset a lot faster. And now it's become pretty, effortless. And like I said before, it's effortful in the beginning when you're trying to do something different, and to react or to respond differently is full of effort, but then become effortless. Now, the minute that I say this, something will happen, and I'm struggling again. But if that happens, that becomes a practice.
That's the test, and that becomes the practice.
Yeah.
I agree completely with that. I have a similar thing that I do. It's throughout the day, though, I try to take breaks, and I'm in a little different position because I'm sort of semi-retired, so I have more time to do this. But I don't think people can use working as an excuse not to. What it does for me is it fortifies me. When I start out in the morning with the idea, after meditation, that life is a clean slate and that I can make choices about whatever happens to me throughout the day because I've focused on that during my meditation, then I have like armor. I have a way of repelling things that come to me, a little bit of a Teflon shield, because like you, I can evaluate and decide, this is a choice that I am about to make. Am I going to get upset? Am I going to suffer? Am I going to put somebody in their place and get down and wallow with them? Am I going to do things that I would regret later that are going to cause suffering or not?
Right.
And so once I think that happens in the morning when you have your routine set, it's easy to go back because you're mindful of what that great experience has been, what that good feeling is, avoiding that kind of thing, and you can rekindle that, you can recapture that if you monitor what your behavior is.
Absolutely.
So we're going to put in the show notes Keith's morning routine and my morning routine, and then we'll talk a little bit in the show notes about some references that you can use on your own to tailor something that would work for you. But the trick is to make sure that it's self-care, that you begin with the idea that you're going to do something for yourself that's going to help you understand that you always, always, always have a choice about what to be and how to react to whatever comes your way, because it's always going to come your way. And then secondly, you also realize along with that, that the true way to feel inspired, calm, more in touch with who you really are, more authentic, is by following compassion, by following gratitude, by following all of the things that we're talking about with respect to sharing and being on the path of helping others. That really leaves you with a sense of, I think, purpose. And one little footnote to that, and that is that I think that we can't pursue happiness per se. We can pursue things, we can pursue ways of being, not things, that allow us to, when we successfully pursue them, allow us to be happy. Happiness ensues as a result of pursuing those.
It's kind of like a byproduct, right?
Kind of a byproduct. And it actually is the product.
Right, right. Exactly. You know, and I, like you, I stopped looking for things outside of myself to make me happy. And I found that happiness just kind of shows up when I am acting from a conscious and loving space and I'm of service to others. I mean, my greatest experience with feeling joy was in the service of others. It really was. Mm-hmm. And now I've served others and not experienced joy, because for me, I need both. I need to be peaceful within, because there are a ton of people that coach Little League, they feed the homeless, and their lives are just chaotic. Not necessarily externally, but internally, they're worrying all the time, they're anxious, they can't, and they do kind things for people, but inside there's no real joy, because there is a war, there's a battle, there's a lot of suffering on inside because of what I just said: anxiousness, worry, shame, guilt, trying to do everything, trying to be perfect, trying to be liked, you name it, they're doing that. So for me to experience joy, it's both in serving others, but it's also being peaceful internally. And it's the morning routine or the daily routine that helps me be consistently peaceful inside.
What do you think about somebody that might be listening to this and think, well, that's all well and good, but isn't it kind of selfish for you just to focus on your own feeling of having this way of dealing with people, because you're really, if you don't react to the way people are acting, then you are really being selfish. You're just rejecting anything the other person has to say, even if there's validity to it. So if somebody criticizes you, for example, if you just have this kind of Zen approach where you say, oh, well, you know, I'm just going to be compassionate toward that person, aren't you really just being selfish?
I mean, yeah, they can say that. and it's cool. I mean, that's their path, you know, to label whatever it is I'm doing, and that's cool. I mean, the mind, the ego, including mine, is no short of labels and descriptions for other people, and that's cool. But if they say that, I provide the space for them to say it. You know, I choose not to take it on. It doesn't have to be a label that I identify with, and that's okay. I just know what works for me, and I encourage you to try it on for yourself. And I find that I'm able to love more fully, unconditionally, to give with my full resources and skills when I'm not operating from a place of labels, when I am doing a routine that reminds me of what's really important to me, what's aligned with my values. And, you know, so that's what I say to people that, you know, may say that showing up the Zen way, you know, is really kind of not, is being selfish. I guess that's one way to look at it, but what's the alternative? Show up the other way?
Well,
that way's full of suffering.
Well, I would argue that it's not selfish at all, and here's why. I think we start from the proposition that all people everywhere have within them the opportunity to be conscious. And while they're conscious, there's no ego. And while there's no ego, then there's no strife, there's no conflict, there's no making other people wrong, there's no labeling. It's just a feeling of love and well-being. And so what gets in the way of the love and the well-being is all of this other stuff that's overlaid, like competition and striving and anxiety and guilt, and that creates all of this stuff that we're trying to avoid. So in the pure state, consciousness is what we all have.
Right.
And that's not selfishness. That's part of the life force that's given to you at birth, and you
Absolutely.
have all of your life to experience, and most of us push it down or forget about it or take it for granted, or we're just not conscious. The opposite of being aware of loving kindness is being unconscious, and unconscious is, in essence, working in life on autopilot without regard for anything beyond getting through the next problem, making yourself look good, making others look bad, sticking up for what you think is right for you, and putting somebody down, and that just gets in the way of your peace and happiness.
Right, it just creates more suffering for you and for others. You asked me the question, what brought me to the place to where I have a morning routine that I do consistently. What brought you to that?
Well, I think I hit that maybe a little bit before I hit ToBeRe. So what was going on in my life was I was also very, very stressed out. Not by one event like in your case, but in my case it was sort of like a bunch of termites eating a healthy tree. Eventually, after 20 years of the termites, the tree starts to keel over. And I was lucky enough that I recognized that the way I was living was eating me alive. So I started to do some research in myself. And then I discovered meditation, and meditation truly helped me because it allowed me to focus on just being with nothing added, just relaxing and recognizing my breath, that I was alive, feeling that in its basis was the essence of who I was with nothing added. And it created that space to allow the feeling of calm to flow into me, which in turn allowed an opening of consciousness that I've continued to try to build on.
Right, yeah, man, thank you. and I've been a beneficiary of that in our friendship because you're such a good friend, and
Thanks.
And you're welcome. And I know that's not just something that just happened. I mean, you're conscious, and people that are conscious make great friends. I mean, period.
I think it's great that people don't judge one another.
Right.
That's one of the things we struggled with a lot. Growing up and living in our culture, which encourages judgment and finding fault. If we can get away from finding fault and getting away from being judging of anything at all or anyone,
Right.
And just accept it, that's I think a much better, healthier way to be with less suffering. Mindfulness teaches that the natural state is to be in the present moment, knowing exactly what you're doing, being aware of all the stimuli, enjoying it all, not judging it. And that, I think, leads to less stress and inner peace.
I completely agree. When people ask me, why am I this way, or how did I get this way, I tell them that I wasn't always this way, and all I got to do is bring them to a friend who knew me before, and just to get them to like, hey, can you confirm this person that this is how I used to operate before? And Rick does it, lovingly, of course. And I talk about the importance because I see the suffering in their lives about it, and they can create a morning routine that works for them. And the mind often, tells them that they have a hard time committing to it on a daily basis because of life or this or that. And, I tell them that it's an investment in themselves.
That's really good.
It's an investment in their own self-care. It's going to help them be really present for life. Most people, I think, live for the next big event, whether it's a vacation or it's a crisis. And when I say it's a vacation, it's easy for people to see that, oh my God, I'm excited about this next vacation, it's coming up. But there's a whole lot of living between that next vacation. And let's say that you're fortunate enough to take 5 weeks a year off a vacation. Okay, that still leaves 47 weeks worth of living if all you're living for is that next big moment. So the daily routine helps you live those 47 weeks or those spaces in between the vacation, which there are a greater number of those, really being peaceful, being kind, and being loving. But that's not how most people live, and certainly not how I live. The way that I lived those moments were striving, achieving, judging people, worried about this, worried about that, anxious about this moment, obsessive thinking. And when you're doing that, you're not living. You're barely surviving. And if it's not vacations that you are looking forward to, then you're on the lookout for the next big crisis. So even after one crisis that you worried about didn't come to fruition or wasn't as bad as you thought it was, you're like, don't worry about it. I'm worried about the next one. Not know where it's coming from, but it's coming. And so you spend your whole time, living in fear or anxious about what's coming next. Again, the bottom line is you're not living. Yeah. You're not present. So what the routine does is you brings you back to consciousness. Now the mind is going to resist it and tell you that you don't have time for this. And to the mind you say, this is beyond your ability to comprehend. This is outside of yourself. And for the mind, that's hard because the mind cannot even begin to grasp that there's something greater than itself, that there's something bigger and beyond it. And so it's going to give you every reason why you can't do it and it doesn't work, from I don't have enough time to where I didn't get to bed early enough last night, or I got this too much on my plate. And it's when it starts to defend and explain why that the truth is that that's when you should be doing it. And when you bring a daily routine, preferably in the morning, to your life, what it's going to do is going to create an opening in between the thinking, and it's going to divide them apart, and it's within that space that presence and consciousness is able to permeate every part of your life. And it's there that you can be kind, loving, of service, and it becomes effortless. How do you know consciousness is not there? Is if you're not doing those things and there's no gratitude. Then you're on the other side of it. You're at the effect of the mind. You're in default mode. There's no living there. There's certainly no joy.
Boy, that's beautifully said. That's beautifully
thank you,
said.
Rick.
And I think that's the correct analysis as well. People don't realize, but there's a dichotomy between who we are and what our mind is. They're two different things. We tend to identify with our mind.
Yeah, we think it's only just one.
Yeah, we think it's just our mind, or we think it's just us, and that's our mind. And it's not. We have such a high regard for intellectual capacity in this culture.
Yeah, we've been conditioned to think that way.
That's right, that intellect solves all the problems, but that fails to consider a lot of other elements, which includes psychological well-being, emotional well-being, even a spiritual component that the mind doesn't really help you with, in the sense of providing anything other than an analysis, and often the analysis is not broad enough and doesn't give you the correct feeling or feedback. So what this idea is in stopping the mind is to try to regulate the mind, or if you can sort of regard yourself as the thinker behind the thought.
Right, the observer.
The observer, and the mind is actually a tool in your panoply of things to make problems go away. That's just a tool, and it's not you. That's a start, I think, in helping understanding that the mind has its own agenda, and it's usually about self-protection, making you look good, making the other person look bad.
Being superior.
Being superior, being judgmental, all of those things which are negative that gets in the way of, all of those get in the way of happiness and fully functioning, emotionally strong people.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And I love what you said about, you're the observer, you're in control. You can't control things outside of you, but internally you can.
Yes.
And and the mind is a tool. So the question is, are you using the tool, or is the tool using you? and for most people, and for much of my life,
mine too.
My mind was using me. I was at the effect of it. I was in complete default mode, and it was driving the bus, and I was along for the ride. And that's transition. And since that's happened, I'm at peace.
Yeah. And if peace is your goal, if inner peace is your goal, and the feeling that you're on the right track in your heart, and that you're part of something bigger than just your possessions and your successes, then that's the way that you have to go. I think
Yeah.
you have to realize that the mind is just the tool. Otherwise, it'll run you.
Right. And the daily routine is the access to controlling the tool, to wielding the tool, to using it so that it is, when it's necessary, you use the mind for practical purposes, booking an airline ticket, creating a presentation, preparing for a client meeting. When it's no use to you, you put it aside, you attend to just being conscious, being kind, being loving, and things like that. But the morning routine, I think, is, at least in my life, is essential to being able to use a tool and the tool not using me. And you can just try it on in your own life and see how it shows up for you. And if you're suffering, the tool is using you. That's your key. Let me pull you behind the curtain. That's what's going on. If you're making excuses of why you can't forgive in that moment, or you need time to come to grips with being letting something go, pull you behind the curtain. You're being used. It's using you. Consciousness doesn't need time, space, or anything to just be loving. It just is.
And it's a choice.
It's a choice.
In every moment, you can make that choice. Whatever the circumstances, you can make that choice. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's something that you can do without having some sort of misgiving. But once you start down that path and you monitor all of the times when the ego is taking you in the wrong direction, and then you institute something like a gratitude practice or a loving kindness practice, you'll compare the differences and see that the loving kindness way is superior.
Absolutely. Rick?
I love you, buddy.
I love you too, man. Thank you.
Thank you. you.